My name is Paul Luna, and you're tuned into F&B Lunacy. I am here today with Dr. Julia Skinner. Hello.
Hello.
You recently finished writing a book on the history of fermentation. What was the process like?
Well, I got the idea a couple years ago, and I was kind of wrestling with how I wanted to do it because it's such a big topic. But what I decided to do was to organize it by themes rather than by, say, geographic area or type of food or something like that. And so that was interesting because I kind of got to go down more rabbit holes that let me connect different kinds of foods. So thinking about like meat in Viking culture and Celtic culture, for example, both kind of have similar mythological roles in those cultures. Things like that that I wouldn't have ever really uncovered if I had just been like, oh, in this place they make mead, and in this place they make mead.
What is your approach to teaching fermentation?
So I've been teaching fermentation and other things, for over 10 years. And one of my big things is to make my classes interactive and fun and accessible for folks. And so I do that by trying to teach in a way that incorporates a lot of different learning styles. So for example, having visuals, text, audio, whatever kind of works best for people. But I also try to do a lot with like food justice too, making sure that people have access to the classes who otherwise wouldn't. So scholarships, things like that, for people who otherwise can't them.
What triggered your curiosity for fermentation?
Everybody comes to it for such different reasons. And for me, I came to it because I was food insecure. And so at the time, I was pretty much living off of what I could get from the food bank. I didn't really have a lot of money for groceries. And so I started gardening to help supplement that because, food banks don't always have a lot of fresh vegetables. And I wanted to have some fresh vegetables. But, of course, if you garden, you know that everything kind of comes at once. Like it all comes ripe at once. Then you're like, oh God, I've got like a dozen cabbages. What am I going to do with all of these? And so I started, making jams and doing other things. And then I was like, oh, I can also ferment these. And so I started with sauerkraut, which I think for a lot of people in the US is kind of like their gateway ferment. Like a lot of people start with that and then branch out. And yeah, from there I started making beverages and, on and on down the rabbit hole. But yeah, it was initially out of a lack of food that I found this way that helped me make more food, which was kind of cool. One of the things I enjoy about the kind of fermentation that I do, I typically do wild fermentation. So using the microbes that are already in our environment rather than a starter, and which is super fun, but leads to inconsistent products, which I think is great, but isn't great if you're trying to have a product line. So what I do instead is I teach online classes. I do like consulting. Like I just finished working with a filmmaker on a project where I helped him set up like a whole film set where he had a bunch of stuff in the background for making ferments, and then things like that. So it's kind of all over the map, but more interactive with people rather than product based.
So your virtual class that you teach currently, they are pretty much, let's say, like this. We're watching you.
Yeah, so I have a few different ones I do. I have some that are online that are just they're self-paced, asynchronous, start and go however long you want. And so those ones, I have videos of me, and I have text and photos and that kind of thing, but it's not live. But I do have like monthly hangouts with one of those classes so that if people have questions or whatever, they have a space where they can still interact with me. But I also do Zoom-based classes. I think everybody is doing a lot of Zoom-based cooking classes right now. I'm grateful I was already doing it before the pandemic, so it was just like, okay, well, that's just what I'm doing now, like once it started. But yeah, I do mostly fermentation classes, but sometimes other things too, talks on food history and stuff like that.
You have a PhD in library science.
I do.
How does this intersect with your current work?
So it's interesting because when I was I worked in a museum as a curator prior to this, and I've worked as a library science professor and all kinds of things. And when I left that field full time, I remember a lot of people being like, what are you doing going into food? Like, these things are not related at all. But what I really like about food and the people in food, food is inherently interdisciplinary. It touches on so many different things. Like, it's not, just putting food in your body. It's, cultural and historical and all this stuff. And so library science is kind of the same way. Like, it's a field that you could say is social science or humanities, or, it touches on all these different things. And because we're dealing with information like food is something that, touches on so much different stuff, so many different areas.
Gastronomy plays a role in this.
Yeah. So gastronomy is interesting because I think when we think about gastronomy, what we're thinking about is fine food and really appreciating food and all of that. And I think fermentation is now becoming more appreciated thanks to Noma and other places like that. But really has been a critical part of what makes fine food, delicious food, good. I mean, you have umami, of course, that is contributed to greatly by fermentation. But you have, this complex sourness of vinegars, sauerkrauts, things like that, that's more than just, using a squeeze of lemon juice, which is also great, but just it has so much more complexity. So I think it helps us kind of pick apart what's going on in our food a little more than using non-fermented things.
When you look at a product, the raw material, do you dissect that product to find out what's in it, or do you just partake in and start eating?
It depends. I also am a food historian, so I'm always curious about, where are these ingredients from? What's this? Why did they put these things together? I probably do that more than most people, but yeah, I think I do that a lot.
Even if you're the one making it and you're cooking it, you're continuously asking yourself about all of these things?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. So I have a kind of synesthesia where every single thing I look at has a different flavor. So there's, the wires in my brain are kind of crossed in a way where I'm looking at my dresser right now and the blue paint on that, obviously I haven't actually tasted it, but it has a flavor that's different than, this dresser over here or whatever. And so it's like this weird, it's not uncommon, but it's interesting because I'll sometimes use that rather than, so I'll look at a cabbage and I'll be like, oh, I know what cabbage tastes like, of course, but I'll be like, oh, but the green and the texture of this cabbage tastes a certain way, so I'm going to pair it with this thing. And so, yeah, I dissect things in a few different ways as a historian and then as somebody with crossed brain wires.
Have you worked with chefs about creating recipes?
Yeah, so I've worked with, so I do a lot of my own recipe writing already, but I've worked with some chefs. When Watershed was still open, I worked with them on making some different things. They had this dish on the menu where they used some banana vinegar that I made and used it in a bread pudding. It was really good. But I've also gone in and just taught chefs too. I've gone in, the folks at Victory Brands had me in a couple years ago to train their staff on how to make kimchi and a couple other ferments as well. So I do both, and then I also do recipe writing for my own business.
Because it would be very fun to have you there and put a lot of products right next to you and see what you do. Yes.
Yeah. No, it's really fun. I love it.
When you're not at work, where can we find Dr. Skinner?
So I have a garden and I spend a good amount of time in there. I do a lot of foraging, and so I'll just be kind of out wandering in nature and eating plants. My neighbors get really confused because I'll be out in my front yard and like I've got a bunch of like chickweed and other wild plants growing there, and I'll just be picking stuff and eating it. And they drive by and they're like, "Ugh, what's that lady doing?" And I recently got an acreage out several hours away, and so I'll go out there and forage and wander around. But yeah, lots of time out in nature, or with my garden or my chickens.
With your chickens?
Yes, I keep chickens and quail.
How many?
Right now, I'm down to 4 chickens, and I've got 16 quail.
Do they produce eggs?
Yeah, yeah. So I don't have to buy eggs, which is really nice.
Every once in a while, can you make us an omelet?
Yes, yes. I once in a while will share my eggs, but with only 4 chickens, I don't get that many, especially in winter, unfortunately.
What is your favorite ingredient? Is there a favorite ingredient?
I mean, yeah, that's a hard one to answer. And I think, I think most of my favorite ingredients, partly because I learned to cook when I didn't have a lot of, financial resources, so I couldn't afford to use, truffles or anything. I had to rely and still rely on really basic, affordable ingredients like cabbage, again, things like that, cabbage, carrots, stuff like that. And just trying to take that and turn it into the best version of itself that I can make it.
When are your online classes? Their schedule? Is there a place that we can look up where?
Yeah, so on my website, if you go to rootkitchens.shop, you'll see all of those. So those ones, Preserving Abundance, and then several others, are just online, and you start it whenever, and it's not live, so you don't have to worry about like if your schedule fits with it. That food waste one in particular, I wanted to make that way so that people could be able to access that food waste knowledge without having to worry about like, oh no, I can't make this meeting or whatever. So yeah, that's a good place to find them. I have that one. I've got one on using kind of terroir, like that concept, but with microbes. And I've got another one on sowens, which is a fermented oat food from Scotland that is not made super often anymore, but it's super good. And I'm hoping more people will make it.
This is an off-the-wall question that I tend to ask. Do you consider yourself a lunatic?
I do, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's like the whole tradition of lunacy coming from the moon, which is this powerful, wonderful, intuitive thing. And I think if we bring that into our cooking, that's really powerful.
I appreciate your knowledge. It really has helped me see food in a different light.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Is there anything that you would like to share with the people that we may not know about you?
Well, so I'm a visual artist in addition to being a chef. So this mural back here I actually painted several years ago. So yeah, that's another way I kind of engage with my creativity, and I find that when I'm really, really feeling creative, I'll go in my art studio and do a bunch of painting or drawing or calligraphy. One of my degrees is in calligraphy, which is so random, but I love it.
Julia, I have to say, you're quite the interesting person.
Thank you.
You, perhaps, next conversation I reach out to you. You're like, well, I actually started taking courses on surgery. And
I mean, I'd be open to it.